Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Good morning, Trumptopia. Hello and namaste. Thank you for tuning in, my friends. If you're new to the show, hold on to your seats. This might be confusing. First things first. I often get accused of being pro-Trump. I think that just comes from a first glance on the surface. They see the word Trumptopia and they're like, woohoo, MAGA, it's a MAGA show. And then they tune in and they're like, the fuck is he talking about? Secondly, I get accused of being blindly anti-Trump. I beg to differ. I don't think that I am blindly anti-Trump. I sit somewhere in the middle of all the extremes. I humbly suggest that this might be a healthy place for us all to gather. But we'll talk about that more in future episodes. Thank you for patiently coping with my one of many mini hiatuses. As you may or may not know, I have duties in other dimensions, as it were, metaphorically speaking, although sometimes literally. And sometimes I just don't have the time or the wherewithal to gather my thoughts and my equipment and my time in an efficient enough manner in order to do this and attend to all the other things that I am required to attend to. But here we are, back together again for the very first time, to quote the admirably talented Dave Brubeck. Or to misquote, really, because, anyways, I digress. Let's address where we are. Where the fuck are we right now in this given moment? I think that many of our brothers and sisters who continue to be enamored with the mighty 45 and continue to be his supporters, I think they perceived this moment we just lived through as some sort of conclusion, some sort of closure. And I think that, and I could be wrong, right? For those who aren't familiar with my show, that pin is always up right there at the very top. I understand that I could be wrong. I'm not pretending to be absolutely right. I'm throwing out suggestions like spaghetti strands against the refrigerator to see what sticks. So, I think, humbly, I propose to you, that some of the Trump support base might be hoping that after the resolution of this transition, and I think we can all agree that this has felt like that kind of beat, right? That kind of moment in time where things culminated, came to a climax of sorts, which to some, arguably on the other side, was a bit anticlimactic. And then there's been a bit of a denouement, right? A letting go. And we are now sort of at the dawn, metaphorically speaking, of a new chapter, a new era, a new moment, a new segment, a new act. Now, here's where I think my perspective and the perspective of Trump supporters might differ. And this might also differ from everyone that is not so much a Trump supporter. And for those wondering, I technically consider myself a part of the resistance, right? And I say that with like power to the peaceful, fist in the air, and with commitment and confidence and humble pride, if there can be such a thing. Pride being, one of the 7 deadly sins. I did a whole episode about it. You should check that one out if you haven't heard it yet. I humbly suggest. I try to, and I hope I don't sound like an idiot, or I hope I don't sound pretentious, but I try to remind myself that I do try to begin from a place of humility. So, what is my position? The Trump supporters, I think, envisioned this as the beginning of a new Trump normal, where Trump might actually finally, having quote-unquote vindicated himself, might really be able to finally roll up his sleeves. God forbid we should see what his elbows look like. And really get to the real work, the real heavy lifting, as it were, of finally actually draining the swamp and fixing the system as only he alone can fix it. I don't think that's the act we're about to engage in. I think that's the red herring at the first scene that's gonna like sucker punch all of the Trump base. Now, this sucker punch is gonna cut both ways. I think we're gonna hit some sort of weird left turn, and I don't mean left as in like politically left. I just mean like not the direction we all thought it was going, that anybody thought it was going. And I don't claim to be able to predict what that is. I just have this sensation that, well, remember when I said shit's gonna get weirder? It really did, didn't it? And I didn't try to predict how it was gonna get weirder or what was gonna be weirder about it in any kind of specific way. I'm not pretending to be psychic or anything, you guys. I just have a keen connection to my intuition and a particular perspective on what's going on. Now, for those of you who are wondering, let's zoom out real quick. Let me give you the bullet point recap, right? And my show is really like a talk show. It's not one of these, it's not an episodic, I don't know, the term episodic gets used in both directions. My podcast doesn't have a larger arc necessarily, in that I'm not retelling you a story, or I'm not a journalist reporting out something that's happened or is happening, right? It's more like a talk show format, but there is a web of interconnected themes. I'm always saying, like, put a pin in this. Those pins are like not just throwaway things or dead ends or loose ends. There's things that we're going to go back around and revisit. Now, why did I point that out? I don't remember. Oh, no, I know why. I think that what we're all going to face together here in this period of Trumptopian history is the clusterfuck of fail either. I mean, there's a few options I can speculate on. But what I think we're going to have to confront behind, there's always the distraction, right? And that's going to get more intense, or it's going to collapse on itself. Those were the options I was seeing. Those are the two extremes, and then there's variations in the middle. Remember, nothing in the universe is absolute. So if you identify two opposites, you must also recognize the middle and the middle between those middle and the two extremes, right? There's always more to be found in between two positions. You can always cut a segment in half and then cut that segment in half and cut that segment in half, because all things are fractal. Our minds are fractal. Our lives are fractal. The way we behave as a species has fractalized elements of it. Thus, the age-old adage, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. To paraphrase, I've never been one to get like dead-on quotes memorized, and please forgive me. That doesn't mean I don't know what I'm talking about, right? That just means I didn't sharpen that particular tool. So behind this either collapse of the crazy, and what does that mean? I can imagine Trump sort of running out of steam. I can see him sort of going, wow, I've cleared that hurdle. they're not going to impeach me, or if they are, it's going to be so close to the election that it won't really matter, kind of like the way Clinton's impeachment sort of ended up being a useless exercise. And then the election will be the election. I'm not even trying to think that far. In the intervening time, and here's what's important, my friends, because whether Trump and his operation runs out of steam and collapses and starts to sort of fall apart, and thusly they start building the exit strategy, which I contend one might say that's sort of modeled loosely, I will admit, on the Nixonian episode, right? What happened to Nixon? The pressure built. He insisted he was innocent and not a crook. The evidence came out. It was denied. It was sidestepped. The can got kicked down the road. I'm not here to give anybody a history lesson. Plenty of people know the history of the Nixon episode of America much more granularly than I do. But in the end, what happened? He waffled, right? He collapsed in on himself. And instead of facing more political damage and the risk of failure in that arena, he exited. And his good old buddy, who inherited the gig, who took his place, right? Like, he sent him a pardon so that at the federal level, whatever everybody was pissed off about and conducting investigations on, it could now just be sort of logged in the books as mostly sorted out and solved, but there's nothing we can do. Poor old Nixon's just got to live in infamy. And from the beginning, especially from when I realized that Roger Stone was involved, not just, I've always known Roger Stone was in Trump's orbit. Because, mind you, a lot of Trump haters and a lot of Trump fans are relatively new to Trump. But he's been around our entire lives. And for some reason, I don't know why, he's always been on my personal radar. He's always been a fascinating weirdo to observe. So I'm always spiraling out of control from my objective. So I see these two opposites, but let's remember that activity, the activity we're all arguing about, the Mueller report, the Russia stuff, all of his policy attempts, all of his efforts at draining the swamp. That's what I suggest to you is indeed mostly distractionary. Although he's definitely out to cripple the system as it has existed for our entire adult lives as much as possible. That's clearly something he's out to do. And now it's almost irrelevant whether or not that's because Russia got to him or because there's been a strain of ideology that's native to American politics that says government is the problem. Let's overthrow the government. Let's cripple the government. Let's do damage to the government. I hate government, elect me to office, right? I've talked about this before, way back in the early days of the podcast. Why is it so popular amongst a certain category of people, a certain demographic of people? And I'm not trying to be, snob-ish or elitist or hateful towards that demographic of people. I'm just asking the question, how does this logic work? I mean, I get it. There's corruption. I get it. There's corruption everywhere, yo. By now, if you've listened to more than 3 episodes, you should understand some general idea of what I think the deeper problem is, right? Like, you can't fix government by destroying government, and you can't fix government by going in and letting it destroy you. Those seem to be the 2 basic ways that things play out. And that's because people who get involved in government, regardless of their, and I could be wrong about this, folks, but what I've observed seems to be that the higher up in government any person, regardless of origin, regardless of backstory, regardless of their personality and political makeup, the more they get into it, the closer to the centers of power relative to whatever layer of politics they're involved in, the more exposed, and thus the more often they are entrapped or ensnared by corruption. Okay? So whether or not Trump ever meant well, now, forgive me, all my dear friends who love Trump blindly, but if you have a clear-sighted look at his history, the dude has always peddled in corruption. He comes from wealthy people who always craved more wealth and more power. So that's where we get to the bigger issue where everyone sort of backs up. Like I said, we're not going to fix government and government corruption by destroying government. And, although, yes, I've been seeing this meme a lot lately, that it is perfectly constitutional. It is in the Constitution that if your government becomes tyrannical, it is your right to organize an overthrowing of it. We get to the larger point, right? Like, what is the bigger analysis? What is it that I'm inviting people to join me in discussing in this project? Why do I host this crazy show? Politicians, and forgive me if I'm hurting your feelings about a favorite politician, that is not my goal. Politicians are just human beings. Now, as I always like to acknowledge, I know there's a lot of deep-reaching conspiracy theories going all the way to the point of suggesting some of them might be aliens or lizard people. There's always the Anunnaki who are here for our gold. And I think there's been plenty of opportunity, because I always ask this question, right? There's been plenty of opportunity for an Anunnaki Trump to have really put it, just sunk it home and gone for the Anunnaki win, and why hasn't it happened yet? There's always that question that confronts any conspiracy theory. If they're trying to kill us all, why aren't we dead? If they're trying to forcibly reduce the population to the number that's on the Georgia tablets, why aren't we there yet? They've had our entire lives to pull it off. Remember when there was a big rash of memes just really aggressively implicating FEMA as some really dark, nefarious, agency for the deep dark Illuminati, or the whichever version of the conspiracy theory model you prefer, and that there was these photographs of coffins that they were setting up and all these death centers in every state, and that they were going to kill us and reduce the population by some number, or that number, I forget which, if it was related to the Georgia Stones or not. For those of you who don't know who the Georgia tablets are, what the Georgia Stones are, there's a monument somewhere in Georgia that some people see as a very positive thing. That if you look at it from a holistic, mystical, spiritual point of view, and you don't assume that they mean bloody murder and depression, then these are like spiritual goals to strive towards. And that's how I was originally introduced to the Georgia Stones, which is interesting. And then, more recently, there's this really negative and dark, nefarious interpretation, and that it's basically sort of a hiding in plain sight warning that they are about to wipe more than half of us off the face of the earth. And I'm sure, I haven't seen it yet, but I will not be surprised if there's already some predictive programming, brainwashing meme saying that the Avengers and Infinity Wars is actually about preparing us for the ultimate sacrifice, right? Like our own government is getting ready to do what, what's it, Purple Grimace, what's his name? Josh Brolin's character. Is it Josh Brolin or Jode Brolin or Jim Brolin? I'm terrible at names, you guys, forgive me. I forget my own name. That's why I had to come up with a pseudonym that was so weird that I could remember it all the time. I digress. That may or may not be predictive programming on the part of the evil, nefarious, but the thing is, when all those FEMA memes, they were they do it at the end of the year or by next Thanksgiving or whatever it was, and none of it happened. FEMA rescued as many people as they could, and help rebuild after every natural disaster and help coordinate the distribution of insurance payments, the stuff that FEMA's supposed to do. And they didn't kill anybody. They haven't killed anyone. And curiously, that conspiracy theory has been sort of knocked off the top 10 conspiracy theory list and is no longer quite as prevalent. You don't see it floating around. At least I don't anymore, right? Everyone has their own wacky mix of influence or perspective on the overall pile of garbage that is social media. I digress, though. Where am I going? My point is not to say all conspiracy theories are wrong. People get me wrong. People see me take a sliver of what I'm trying to say and then make all kinds of really erroneous conclusions. I'm not anti-conspiracy theory, okay? I refuse to label myself a conspiracy theorist, but I'm not against the concept or the idea or the community or the movement. I am very pro-humanity, y'all. I want humanity to not destroy itself. I'm all in favor of that. That's what I'm about. So what am I in relationship to conspiracy theories? I suppose that I am an enthusiast of observing impartially as I can, the conspiracy theory movement at all. And I have been for a very long time. Because it couples up, it goes hand in hand with my fascination and obsession with the observation of socio-political, religious facts of history and how we went from the mythologies, and again, I'm not out to offend anybody. I'm not out to offend, really strong faith folks who believe in their Messiah or their prophet or their God, and don't think of it as mythology. I'm not using that word in a negative light, and I'll get into I have to do a whole nother episode where I get into because I really wanted to do a Green Easter episode for cannabis talk, so tune in for that. I'll get way more into it, but they're mythologies, right? And I think they're mythologies based on something that actually happened, and something that, in my theory of synthesizing all the different theories I've investigated in the 30 years I've been fascinated by religion, politics, society, history, conspiracy theory, and how they all converge, and those are really broad topics, and there's so many topics I didn't list, but I come back, right? I'm trying to get back to my main central point. There's a pattern that emerges when you set aside an attachment to this model or that model, when you set aside an attachment to proving one group's idea right or wrong, and you just observe. And here's why I think I feel this passion, this conviction to sharing these thoughts, because I think this pattern's significant. I think this pattern is relevant. I think this pattern has everything to do with the frustrating and maddening and depressing things going on in our global society today. Now, let me abstract a bit, because I know I spiral out of control always, but let me get to my point, but by leaping off from an abstract place. We are not going to end war by fighting wars. We are not going to solve politics by politicking politicians. Why do I think those two things are true? Because from the Tower of Babel to now, those are the two things we've been bashing our faces against. I think I've already done this episode, and I haven't, forgive me. I'm referencing something in material I haven't posted yet. But I may have already posted it. There's my open letter, in terms of reading it here for the podcast. There's an open letter I have on Facebook to all those who are craving bloody revolution, right? And I'm not going to read it now because I've already rambled on too long here. But my point is, revolve, revolution, revolving door, same root. I think they want us to do that, right? So why are we beating our faces against the same bloody meat grinder of self-destruction? Why aren't we examining things from a perspective that engages our relationship to nature as it actually exists? And why is that important? Because if we understand nature as it actually exists versus how this group or that group insists that it ought to be, then we might understand what we as a species are currently engaged in doing to ourselves. You want to fix Trump? Let's heal the human species. Here's why. Anybody that becomes the focus of society's attention becomes engaged in a metaphysical relationship with the rest of the world that they probably have no conscious awareness of, right? Now remember, folks, I'm positing my theories here from a central point of a sort of theoretical thesis of esoteric cosmology that has many components, none of which I've done a particularly great job of spelling out. But I've gathered these components and synthesized them from things that are literally littered around the world. So it isn't like this group is right, that group is right. It's like, what has humanity learned, discovered, been inspired to share that the system of oppression has routinely and systematically blocked from mainstream consciousness? Why would I look for those things? Because there's got to be a reason. If the system of oppression, let's concede that there is one, right? Lots of people in America, and granted the world, live in a universe, and for those of you who don't know yet, I'm convinced metaphysically and cosmologically that we all indeed inhabit a small micro-universe, a personal universe that is both emanating from our transducing meat puppet avatar, and then, of course, returning right back in, collapsing back in to be perceived and re-rendered within the mindscape of our meat-talking monkey suit that is our, semi-autonomous movie camera for the divine being that we erroneously call God. And by erroneously, I just mean we personify him in an incorrect fashion. Because it's not a him, it's a him and a her, and ultimately no actual gender. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so if all of that, if the central nexus of the thesis is remotely accurate, and I'm not pretending to assume that it is, I'm saying we as a species should go and find out and investigate it, because a lot of people have suggested that it might be true, and it's the biggest collective theory or set of theories that the system of oppression has actively, routinely, systematically tried to eradicate. So there's got to be something there. There's got to be something that the system of oppression doesn't want us to engage with. And here's my theory of what that is. I've spelled it out before. I'm going to spell it out again because I think it's important. So it's got to be said multiple times in as many ways as possible so that as many different kinds of minds can engage with it in a way that isn't, threatening to their defense systems, but healing, The system of oppression, deep down, I'm talking about Trump himself, but also I am talking about Trump himself. It gets confusing, and then I kind of start interrupting myself to try to over-explain. The system of oppression is being conducted by ourselves, by us, by people. Now, we all feel really intensely individual and separate from one another. As Einstein pointed out, the universe is illusion, albeit a very persistent and convincing one. Here's the key. Power and people in power function in an esoteric way by default that they may or may not consciously be aware of. But I think that at least not those on the public stage, those deeper back in the shadows, I think they understand this and they are using it against us. Leaders operate like magnifying glass lens mirrors, right? So at the center of the thesis, the meta-thesis of this sort of like esoteric, not organized religion, because I'm not forcing anyone to believe this, but I think if we all meditated and shit, we could come to a consensus about this thing through direct phenomenological observation. At the center of this cloud of statements about a universe like that is one in particular that is salient here. We are all mirrors for each other. Now, that one's tough to work through if we're not accustomed. When I first heard that, I was like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Everyone's so different from me. And of course, that's the thing. They aren't actual mirrors. They're like figurative, illusory, people person mirrors. Let's give that statement the theoretical granted status of being true. If that is so, then people in powers, in nexuses of power, who are in danger of being or are already hijacked by ego, because of the way we've structured our society, they attract attention and function as sort of parabolic lenses that project back onto the public. Way at the beginning of this project, I have an episode somewhere, and the doubty voice in my head says, "Ooh, that may have been one of the ones you deleted and then misplaced or got, accidentally lost due to transferring devices." At some point, I stated that Trump is a symptomology. And this is just another sort of more mechanical, allegorical expression of that, right? Like, if we are all mirrors, then the evil, corrupt people in power are mirrors that reflect humanity's overall level of ego corruption. Now that's a big, bitter pill to swallow. I get it. I understand the knee-jerk reaction that when someone horrible becomes your representative, we don't want to take responsibility for that. We want to blame them. But that is a conditioned response. At the center of our societal system of echo chambers that condition us, that's how our society works. There have always been echo chambers. They're not new concepts. They are not new tools being implemented on us. They've been around for millennia. It has to do with the way our brains work. At a neutral playing field, echo chambers can be used for positive work. Right? Just like the gun enthusiasts say, guns are not evil, they're just tools. Evil people use them in evil ways. Sure, I don't disagree with that statement at all. The flaw in that logic there, though, is that guns are designed explicitly for one thing and one thing only, which that act is inherently sort of borderline really super evil, right? Like, guns are designed, for whatever reason, contextually, you might feel justified in doing it. They're designed to be shot at with the purposes of killing another human being. But that's not what I want to make this episode about, right? If all of these puzzle pieces that are converging can be granted the theoretical status of being true, then we can explore the theoretical extensions of these pieces working in harmony together. What does that mean? And I've tried to condense it down to one meaningful statement that can be memeified, right? Like, and I mean in the broader sense that it can become something that people share Not because I'm popular or I'm famous, but because the information being conveyed is valuable and worth sharing. And here it is. As soon as we can heal ourselves, then we can heal each other. When we can heal each other, then we will be able to heal the whole species. And when we can heal the whole species, we will heal the Donald Trumps and the Obamas and whoever you don't like, whoever you think is a horrible person, whoever is actually being an evil human being can be healed through the integrated process of healing the entire species, right? Now, as a solution to the massively, hideously complex array of problems that humanity has created for itself, I understand the challenges of it seeming almost implausible. But if it is inherently by itself an impossible solution, why has the system of oppression spent so much time and effort, energy, money on making sure that humanity is conditioned to reject that solution? If it didn't work, they wouldn't spend so much time bad-mouthing it, vilifying it, making things like meditation seem evil because it opens the portal to demons, right? Now I'm speaking in broad strokes. I want to close with this thought because it's important, I think, that as we work through the opening scenes of this new act of political theater, that we, on the side that does not support Trump, right? Because, I mean, the whole species is my intended audience, and I don't mean to pick sides. I don't want to be us versus them. So I say this to everybody. As we move forward through this period in history, and it's not all about Trump, obviously. I'm just speaking about this particular politician as a focal point of the work I think the whole planet needs to do, because it's the political environment I'm most familiar with and inherently sort of involved in, because this is where I live. But I think if we all took a moment to look around and stripped away the differences and aggregated the similarities in what's going on politically in all of the countries that are experiencing political turmoil, we might find that some of the same sorts of forces are at play. A pushing for the pendulum to swing at more and more extreme levels. A pushing for the normalization of things that should not be normalized. Why? In order to create more lines of division. The more lines of division you have, the more frothing what's the word? Not protracted. That was the word I was about to incorrectly say. Potential. Probabilistic. The more lines of mental and emotional conflict you can spin people into becoming engaged with, then the more you foment probable violence. The more you encourage and foment probable violence, the more actual violence starts to emerge. I've referenced the biological allegory of the beaver, its dam, and the seemingly impossible way that design improvements spread throughout the human species. I've referenced that before. That's what the system of oppression uses. That's one of the many tools that the system of oppression uses against us, right? And I'll give a quick example, and I want to do a whole special episode on this, but I want to talk about it really briefly to sort of kick it off, and then I got to start wrapping things up. A meme I saw in the last 48 hours was incredibly virulently, violently hate-filled speech that was patently Islamophobia industry, anti-Muslim rhetoric. And I engaged with this post and asked them if they realized or not that by sharing this, they are actually just promoting violence, which is the agenda of the people who profiteer on conflict and violence. We got into a long discussion about it, which I'll hopefully anonymize and then share in a future episode. But I wanted just to leave that pin there, right? Like all of these emergent, organized, viral rhetoric of hate towards this group or that group, they share the common flaw in terms of, like, they can't be righteous truth. They can't be gods if there is a God, which I argue God is not the personified cartoon person God that we've been spoon-fed through religion. But if there is a divine being, there's absolutely zero probability that it is vehemently and passionately involved in all of this bloodshed. That makes no sense. What does make sense is that those who sell the weapons to the good guys and the bad guys and everyone in between, that they would invest in a sophisticated and incredibly subtle sort of underground, invasive psychological advertising campaign that promotes radical violence based on false ideological conflict. And thus, look at the world today. Look at the ever-increasing popularity of violence attacks on temples of every flavor, right? In that discussion I was just referencing, I literally asked them, do you really think that one religion is better than all of the religions? And they were like, they were basically regurgitating lots of Islamophobia about how Islam calls itself a religion of peace, but actually, calls out for violence and the destruction of others. I'm like, well, have you read the Bible? Have you read the Bible? Have you looked at the history of violent acts in America? Despite the common misconception, the statistically verified fact-checked majority of violent, crazy acts from the Oklahoma bombing of was it the FBI building? I forget. But what's his name? He used manure, right? He used fertilizer to make a huge fucking bomb, parked it in the parking garage, blew it up. However long ago. From Columbine shooting, to this woman who just killed herself because she was enamored with the Columbine shooters. Although there are real, genuine acts of terrorism and there are real, genuine terrorists out there in the world, there is no one ideological camp whose hands are free of sin. There's no, Jesus says in the Bible still, thank God, some of the things that Yeshua Christos, the Nazarene, actually taught, somehow managed to survive into the Bible as we see it today, post the entire 3,000 years of 3,000 years of butchering the Bible. And I don't say that to offend people. I'm just like, dude, if you believe in the Bible, you have to realize that it is severely edited to the point of being almost incomprehensible, right? It is the height of hypocrisy for a person who claims to be Christian to Islamophobia, hate speech about Muslims being absolutely, in an absolutist way, a totalitarian religion of violence. Because, look at the imperialism that Christianity has, carried out in the world. For 3,000 years, every act of violence committed against indigenous people in countries where Christianity did not exist was carried out by Christians. Right? And to take this to the extreme, what's the point of pointing that out? Take it to the next extreme. Buddhism. It is officially not a religion, folks. Although we just lump it in together into that bucket because it's easier. It's not a religion. It's a spiritual practice. It's a spiritual practice that is, as a practice, although really it's a giant cloud of a whole massive array of different practices that developed over time in different cultures in different places as the general story, the generic story of Buddhism and Buddha's rediscovery of the path toward enlightenment spread. But these practices are openly, directly, and from their original sources about achieving internal peace so that external peace can be achieved through the interconnected energies of the human species, right? That's overtly what Buddhism is about. And yet in Myanmar, we have, quite literally, oppressive, totalitarian, quote-unquote Buddhist government that has chosen a minority group of people, the Rohingya, to wipe off the face of the earth. It makes no sense that God would want us to destroy each other, especially if we understand through direct communication with the thing we call the divine being, that it is not the cartoon characters we were spoon-fed as children. God is bigger than any of the scriptures, right? And all of the scriptures, by the way, at some point or another, did indeed contain in them some brilliant gems of truth worth preserving and carrying forward. But they are not to be taken in totalitarian, monolithic truth, because they were hijacked a long time ago for the explicit purposes of brainwashing you into supporting and hating other human beings, supporting your group of human beings as being better than that group of human beings, and allowing for us to butcher ourselves. Why would anyone choose to facilitate, support, and give material advantage to that agenda? I don't understand. Why would anyone see what's going on in the world and then choose to try and solve it with virulent hate? You're upset that there's a group of people that are being portrayed to you as virulent haters. So your solution is to choose virulent hate. That's a sucker punch ego trap, motherfucker. That is there to make you the bad guy. By vilifying others, you become the vile one. Thus, my friends, the fight that the resistance is facing is way bigger than whether or not we get these puppet politicians to impeach the puppet president. The fight that the resistance faces is bigger. And again, I say this metaphorically. It's not about just Trumptopia, my friends. It is not. What I am discussing with you, my dear friends, is not just about Trumptopia, and the transformation of, America into what it's trying to become, which is like some sort of totalitarian dictatorship about freedom. Like there is a totalitarian dictatorship about Zen. What the resistance truly faces is a deep challenge, a calling to transform the species itself. So, while I applaud and support all people who are out there trying to fight the political fight to regain some sort of, quote, bunny ears normal or normalcy, I think it's really important to remember that while we are at that, while we try to return to normal, it's really because we are now currently in some new crazy epic insane that is trying to become the new normal. If we want to return to the last bubble of normal that we had, we need to, with clarity, honesty, and fierce bravery and strength, remember that the last bubble of normal was not actually all that amazing to begin with. Before Trump stepped onto the political stage, the system of oppression was still, and had been for quite some time, working full swing to disconnect all of us from our divine reality. We must not get short-sighted and caught up in fixing the Trump problem that we forget that we still need to do a lot of deeper work than that. So don't get caught up in the short-term, news cycle argument about this problem with Trump or that problem with Trump. That's part of the echo chamber system keeping you busy on a treadmill instead of doing the work required to heal the species. You mad at Trump? You hate Trump? Heal the motherfucker. That, I guarantee you, will be 100,000% better comeuppance, because I don't like the word revenge, better karma, a better way to get back at him and them than impeachment, arrest, or any kind of attempted violent revolution. And dear friends, if you came from the supporting Trump camp, but you've become disillusioned, and you're starting to see what a clusterfuck of fail and distraction and division causing he actually is as a political puppet, don't get so angry that you just throw yourself back into the fight attached to some other political puppet. Take this opportunity now, my friends, to step back, regardless of your backstory, regardless of your political origins. Let's step back and remember that we cannot solve the political corruption with more politicaling around, engaging in politics, status quo as it is, without radical transformation at the DNA level of everything that is politics, is just going to render more of the same problems that we're upset about now. Right? And I don't mean to piss anybody off. If we put Bernie in office, guess what? Bernie's going to fight the good fight, and the system's going to get into him. Now, for those who may have not heard this before, and forgive me for being redundant for everybody who has, but like I said, it takes a while to sort of say it in enough ways, enough times, so that everyone can kind of align and wrap their brains around it. But the real problem isn't this person or that person. The problem isn't Putin. The problem isn't, what's his name over in China? Xi Jinping. Ping? Ying? God, I'm terrible at names. The problem isn't whoever it is that set up and paid out all the money through the Panama Papers. That's just the surface of the problem. That's the symptomology. The problem is that within each and every one of us, inside us, deep within, where the real revolution has to happen, where the real resistance work must be done, there we have this meta-level relationship between the light and the dark that's being contentiously resolved for eternity, and that we must attend to. The more we neglect it, which is what the agenda does, the system of oppression, its ultimate goal, all the wars, all the profiteering, all the brainwashing, all the hijacking of societal systems, whether you think it's Hollywood or you're this religion or that religion, because it's all of them, right? All of it is for the purposes of sustaining that system of oppression through profiteering on the things that are the most profitable, which are war, right? And all the systems that support war, including politics. But also, more importantly than that, that's just on their surface. The deeper goal, as I've tried to express many ways before, is to keep you, my friend, you, dear listener, disconnected from the divine truth that only you can guide yourself towards connecting to deep within, inside yourself.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.